Tēnā koutou. Ko tēnei taku mihi ki ngā tangata whenua o Te Rohi nei. Ka mihi hoki o ki ngā toho Te Rohi nei. Ko Paul Gregory taku ingoa. He kei whakahaere au. Ko te mana tate hoko hoko, taku tare, nore rā, tēnā koutou katoa. I'm Paul Gregory and I look after the investment management and the capital markets teams at the Financial Markets Authority. Conduct regulation, what we do is fundamentally about influencing decision making. There are two ways we can do that. We can work with providers to reduce the barriers to good decision making, and we can work directly with consumers and investors to help them make good decisions. Either way, we have to understand how decision making works. Earlier this year, we published a suite of reports looking at both sides of that equation, as it applies to what we call integrated financial products and what everybody else calls ESG, sustainable, responsible, ethical, which are those products claiming to have characteristics and in some cases benefits beyond the traditionally financial. One report looked at the take-up by managed funds of guidance that we had published previously, which said, in essence, that if managed funds use these terms, they need to be able to articulate what they mean by them and then substantiate it. And that's when they use those terms in their product labeling, in their disclosure documents, in their websites, and most certainly in their advertising and their marketing. Very briefly, that report we found vagueness, looseness, and inconsistency overall an immature approach to disclosure. The second report we published, which is one that I'm focusing on today, looked at how investors identify, select, and manage investments with integrated characteristics. And what we found, which I will go into further over the next slides, showed why it matters that the industry approach to disclosure is immature. Our findings were based on a focus group of investors who had chosen an investment on the basis of their values and ethics in the previous 18 months and had recently chosen, or who were actively looking to do the same. So this was not a broad pool of investors. This was people who had made the choice. We looked at drivers. What drives investors to consider ethical ESG investments? And this was in focus groups. It was in conversation. It wasn't a survey. Only a portion of this, and a small portion, is from internal drivers, a self-actualizing conviction about specific issues. Far more often, change comes when latent underlying humanity is triggered by to do something or not do something. And that can be by events or by considerations external to the person's choice of investment, but which prompts them to check their investment, or by finding out something about their investment which surprises them, sometimes in fact often through the media. For providers, it's important to understand that these are as likely to be drivers for the member or the investor to want to have a conversation with you as it is for them to change. In fact, probably more likely, at least initially. We'll all be familiar with retail investors being upset and actually doing something, but changing expectations, the potential for investors changing products is powerful, and providers will react, and indeed traditionally, especially since 2016, have reacted for commercial and reputational reasons, regardless of whether their investors actually move themselves. We look then at, from the drivers to engagement. Whatever the prompt for action, whatever the driver, how investors engage sits across a spectrum. And that spectrum involves, as you can see, moving left to right, decreasing primacy or focus on financial returns, and a corresponding increasing importance for ethical considerations. And that moves from minimizing, or at least carefully managing, how environmental or social considerations affect the performance of the investor's fund, to minimizing or maximizing, but again, managing investors' fund on social and environmental considerations. So moving from the outside in to the inside out. This is an emotional spectrum, but there are very clear implications for product choice. So what drives an investor and where they sit on the engagement spectrum is internal to them. But when they start to look to do their research, they begin to run into barriers which makes that search hard. Research feedback showed that investors were overloaded with multiple sources of information they found impenetrable, technical, difficult to find, and confusing when they did find it. They felt they needed expertise to understand and critically assess that information, and they felt they had no support to do that. certainly not from the source of the information, nor in terms of a trusted independent source. This prompted several reactions. The knuckle down reaction, which is just gritting your teeth and getting on with it, treating it like a chore or an exam. Shortcuts, or not making a decision at all, or at least not yet. Many providers will be familiar with the funnel. Traditionally, this is the model that you apply to acquisition. It's how you assess the effectiveness of marketing, again, especially for online sources. The same concept works from the investor perspective to look at how deep investors got into research before making a decision. You can see the gritted teeth and the shortcuts here. You can also see the prevalence of trusted friends and family. Now, from a financial perspective, they are likely not the people investors should trust, but they do trust them again and again. A well laid out website and good marketing is enough for some people, and that's exactly why they're saying decide on the basis of marketing and advertising. So whatever you say there needs to line up with the detail of your formal documents and disclosure, regardless of whether the investor looks at. As you can see, even for those who have gritted their teeth a bit, not very much is usually sufficient. For most, again, this is a chore they may have guilted themselves into, or been guilted into by family or friends, or which is necessary moral hygiene. Stage, which involves talking to providers and perhaps, and I stress perhaps, looking at a PDS or SOCO. In the end, investors make a leap of faith. They said so specifically in the research. Really important, given what pushed or pulled them to their leaping up point, whether it was an ethical jump scare or a revelation or a crusade. Once they have made a decision, that is the job done. They rarely check back to see if the fund delivered on the drivers and the emotional engagement which we in the first place. They don't ask or try to find out any detail about what the manager is screening, what the manager is tilting toward, how are they voting and engaging, how are they delivering given the previous speaker on UNP relative to the impact that they are claiming to have. And they don't change. Job done. Even those who have brought their values and ethics to bear on the decision return to inertia very quickly, and it lasts. So as a regulator, how the decision is made, how it is engaged from that point, and how it appears to be set from there is a recipe for long-term harm. We're very familiar with the harm which comes from poor returns, poor risk management, poor value for money, over-investment in housing. But what about the harm investors from finding out they've been investing counter to their values for 10, 15, 20 years or longer? Excuse me, that they have been causing harm to people, animals, the environment when they didn't want to. What is the ethical or values equivalent of failing to achieve your retirement goal in a way that you feel comfortable achieving it? Is this a lower ethics adjusted return? Is it a values discounted purchasing power? It must matter, it does matter, and I'm not aware of much research that has been done on what the harm actually is in the intervention. Investor perspective. We know they don't engage properly, we know they don't check, we know they don't change. So providers using terms like ethical and responsible to describe their products need to be acutely aware of these risks. How they design advertise them, how much effort they put into communicating their outcomes to their members, at least trying to share what they're doing and how they're doing it and how they're meeting their goals and aspirations that the investor has, however they live in the first place. And of course, how they manage them. This has implications, given that I'm a regulator, in terms of fair dealing or greenwashing. The concept of the overall impression is critical here. The story you tell must come with sufficient detail to articulate and substantiate that story. And the detail has to be high quality, lucid, and easy to find, even if the investor never wants it. Acting in members' interests. It's not in the members' interest to be effectively ethically defrauded for decades. Value for money. ESG products tend to cost more for investors, but do they get extra value in return for that higher fee? More research, more
more engagement on issues that they care about,
clearer and better communication that is compelling on the issues that they care about, more quantifiable social and environmental impacts and outcomes. For industry, the disclosure muscle, the communication muscle, is one that needs to be developed quickly if they want to claim sustainability impact benefits. Now, to be clear, from a regulatory perspective, a pure regulatory perspective, it is acceptable to do very little on ESG and sustainability, provided you don't pretend or advertise otherwise. But few in the industry want to be clear about that. So substance needs to come along with high quality articulation. Just what's on the realpolitik means that mandatory climate standards are here, broader sustainability standards are in the wings, and the policy tailwind is freshening. Consumer expectation is growing, and there is a slowly but steadily growing influence from what providers we know care about the most, or certainly care about substantially, which is peer pressure. The industry has traditionally kept half an eye on what the New Zealand Super Fund and other Crown funds do, but that is an increasingly challenging task. A concentrated passive equity portfolio, which is what the super fund has moved to, is quite a different replication prospect to an exclusion list. Plus, we will continue to see growth in a particularly powerful peer pressure, which is experienced indirectly through comparison-based research, consumer-friendly tables. Choosing and using financial products is hard. Global research repeatedly shows this. Our research shows this. Introducing ethical or responsible or sustainable or impact concepts to it makes it even harder. It has to be easier for people to make informed choices, especially if, as it seems, they would prefer not to make them. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Very lucid, very clear, very directional. So thank you for that. All questions from the floor.